There are parts of the ocean where light simply does not reach, and as you descend into that darkness, something begins to change. Squids that live near the surface look familiar. Streamlined bodies, fast movement, clear shape. But the deeper you go, the less they resemble anything we recognize. Their bodies lose color, then structure. Some become almost completely transparent, as if they are trying to disappear from the ocean itself. Others begin to produce their own light, faint flashes that appear and disappear in total darkness. Their eyes grow larger, their arms stretch longer, their movements slow, then shift into something quieter, more deliberate. And this is not random. Across different oceans, across different species, scientists have observed the same pattern again and again. As depth increases, squid begin to change in consistent ways, as if the ocean is quietly rewriting them. Within a relatively small shift in depth, two squids can look like entirely different organisms, one built for speed and pursuit, the other built to drift, to wait, to survive without being seen. And then there are those that barely seem to hold a solid form at all, bodies so delicate, so unfamiliar, they almost look unfinished, yet perfectly suited to a place where pressure is extreme and energy is scarce. These are not sudden transformations. They are the result of life adapting over time to a world that becomes more hostile with every meter downward. And still the pattern repeats. The deeper you go, the stranger they become, which raises a question that is difficult to ignore. Why does this change follow such a clear direction? And at what point does life stop resembling anything we understand? Tonight, we descend into that world and begin to understand why the deeper you go, the weirder these creatures become. At first, the ocean does not appear divided at all. From above, it feels like a single continuous body, a vast blue surface stretching without interruption. Yet beneath that surface, depth quietly organizes everything, forming invisible layers that shape how life can exist. Near the top, light pours freely through the water, scattering into shifting patterns that reach down only a short distance. In this upper region, energy is abundant. Sunlight feeds microscopic organisms, which in turn support entire chains of life. Movement here is constant, quick and purposeful, carried by creatures that rely on vision and speed to survive. But light does not travel far. With every meter downward, it weakens, fading from bright clarity into dim blue, then into something softer and less defined. Colors begin to disappear one by one. Reds vanish first, then oranges, until the world settles into shades of blue and gray. Eventually, even that dissolves, and light itself ceases to exist. Below this threshold, darkness is no longer an absence but a permanent condition. As light fades, another force begins to take hold. Pressure builds steadily, almost imperceptibly at first, then with increasing intensity. Water, though fluid, carries weight, and that weight presses from every direction. The deeper the descent, the greater the compression, shaping bodies not through sudden force, but through constant unyielding presence. Structures that function easily near the surface begin to lose their advantage. Rigid forms become burdensome. Flexibility becomes more valuable than strength. Survival starts to depend less on resisting the environment and more on yielding to it. At the same time, food becomes less reliable. Near the surface, energy flows continuously from sunlight. Deeper down, that connection is severed. Nutrients must drift from above, falling slowly through the water column in fragments and particles. What reaches these depths is limited, scattered, and unpredictable. Life continues, but it does so on a thinner margin, where every movement carries a cost. Because of this, each layer of the ocean presents a distinct set of conditions, not separated by clear boundaries, but by gradual transitions that reshape everything within them. In the upper zones, speed and visibility dominate. Creatures are built to chase, to escape, to respond quickly in a space filled with light and competition. As depth increases, these priorities begin to shift. Movement becomes more measured, shapes become less defined. The need to be seen is replaced by the need to remain unnoticed. Further still, the environment grows quieter in its demands, but harsher in its limitations. Without light, vision changes purpose. Without steady food, energy must be conserved. Without relief from pressure, bodies must adapt in ways that seem subtle, yet are profoundly transformative. These layers are not simply divisions of space, they are gradients of survival, each one narrowing the possibilities of form and behavior. Life does not disappear as conditions become more extreme. Instead, it adjusts, reshaping itself to fit what remains possible. And within this vertical world, even a small shift in depth can mean entering an entirely different set of rules. A creature drifting just above one boundary may live in faint light, where outlines still exist. Just below, it enters complete darkness, where sight becomes something else entirely. The change is not distant or gradual over vast spans, but immediate, defined by thresholds that alter how existence itself unfolds. The ocean, in this way, is not a single environment, but many layered together, each one quieter, darker, and more demanding than the last. And as these layers deepen, they begin to guide life along paths that grow increasingly unfamiliar, shaped not by chance, but by the steady influence of depth itself. There is a point during descent where nothing dramatic announces itself, and yet something has already begun to change. The water feels the same, the space still open, but the creatures moving through it no longer carry the sharp clarity of those above. Squids in this middle range do not immediately appear strange. Their bodies still hold the familiar outline, elongated forms with fins that guide them forward. Their arms remain proportioned, their motions still recognizable. At a distance, they could be mistaken for their surface counterparts, moving with quiet control through the dim water. But as attention settles, the differences begin to reveal themselves. Color is the first to soften, where surface squids display richer tones, shifting between patterns and flashes. These individuals carry a muted palette. Pigmentation fades into pale reds, washed browns, and faint silvers that seem to dissolve into the surrounding water. The vibrancy seen above no longer serves the same purpose here, and it slowly recedes. Their skin reflects less, absorbs more, as if brightness itself has become unnecessary. Movement follows a similar pattern. The rapid bursts of propulsion that define surface behavior become less frequent. Instead, motion stretches out, each action carried with a kind of restraint. Fins ripple gently, rather than driving sudden acceleration. Arms drift with the current, before adjusting with careful precision. The urgency seen in shallower waters begins to ease into something quieter. This shift is not weakness, but adjustment. Energy begins to matter in a different way. In a place where resources arrive less predictably, every motion carries weight. Squids here still pursue prey, but not with the same relentless pace. They wait longer between movements, allowing the environment itself to guide encounters. A passing silhouette becomes an opportunity, rather than something to chase across distance. Even their posture begins to change. Some hold themselves more vertically, hovering in place with minimal effort. Others angle their bodies in ways that reduce drag, letting subtle currents assist their position. These are small refinements, almost imperceptible at first glance, yet they mark the beginning of a broader transformation. Their eyes, too, begin to shift. While not yet extreme, they appear slightly larger in proportion, more attentive to faint contrasts than to clear outlines. The world they inhabit no longer offers sharp edges or bright signals. Instead, it presents gradients, shadows, and movement that must be detected with increasing sensitivity. Within this environment, clarity gives way to suggestion. Transparency starts to emerge in subtle forms. Some tissues appear less dense, allowing faint light to pass through edges of the body. Internal structures become less prominent, either reduced or arranged in ways that minimize visibility. The squid does not vanish, but it begins to blur into its surroundings, no longer defined by solid contrast. This is not a sudden transformation, but the earliest indication of a direction. Across different regions of the ocean, similar patterns appear in species that share no direct connection. Separate lineages begin to echo one another, shaped by the same gradual pressures. The result is a convergence, a quiet agreement written into their forms. They are still active, still capable, still clearly part of the world above, yet something within them has started to loosen its ties to that realm. In this middle space, the familiar and the unfamiliar overlap. A squid may glide past with a shape that feels known, only for its coloration, its pace, or its presence to feel slightly altered, as though it belongs to a version of the ocean that follows different rules. Nothing about it is exaggerated, nothing fully transformed, yet the shift is undeniable. It is here that the first signs appear, not as dramatic departures, but as gentle departures from what once defined them. And within these subtle changes, the direction of everything that follows has already been set. In certain layers of the ocean, form itself begins to loosen, as if the body is no longer meant to be seen in full. Edges soften, surfaces lose their certainty, and what once appeared solid starts to give way to something far less defined. Among these depths, some squids take this shift further than others. Their bodies no longer rely on color or shadow to remain unnoticed. Instead, they approach a different solution, one that removes visibility almost entirely. These are often called glass squids, though the name only hints at what they truly are. Their tissues allow light to pass through with minimal interruption. Muscles, skin, and connective structures become nearly transparent, arranged in ways that reduce distortion. Rather than reflecting or absorbing what little light remains, they let it continue through them, as though the body itself is only a faint suggestion within the water. Seen from the side, they can almost vanish completely. Only certain elements remain visible, and even those appear altered. The eyes, essential for sensing what little movement persists, often stand out as the only clearly defined features. They appear suspended within an otherwise invisible form, dark and still, tracking a world that offers almost nothing in return. Inside, the organs follow a similar pattern of reduction. Structures that would normally create contrast are minimized or repositioned. Digestive systems become compact, sometimes clustered into tight regions to avoid interrupting transparency. Blood, which in many animals carries strong coloration, is adapted to appear pale or nearly colorless, reducing its visibility as it moves through delicate vessels. In some species, even the ink sac, once a defining defense, becomes diminished or absent. In a place where concealment relies on absence rather than distraction, releasing a cloud would offer little advantage. The body itself becomes the primary method of survival, not by resisting detection, but by offering nothing substantial to detect. This form of invisibility is not absolute. Under certain angles, faint outlines can still emerge. A slight shift in position may reveal a shimmer where tissue bends light differently. Movement itself can betray presence, as even the most transparent body must displace water as it moves. Yet, these traces are subtle, often too brief or too faint to hold attention. Predators pass through the same space, searching for contrast, for edges, for interruption. In the absence of these cues, the glass squid remains unrecognized, suspended within the same volume of water, sharing the same space without becoming a target. Maintaining such a body requires precision. Transparency depends on the arrangement of proteins and cellular structures at a microscopic level. Any irregularity could scatter light, revealing form where none is intended. Over time, these squids have refined this balance, shaping tissues that align with the surrounding medium as closely as possible. The result is a body that does not announce itself, does not cast a clear silhouette, and does not rely on speed or aggression to persist. Instead, it drifts with a quiet neutrality, existing without drawing attention. Across distant regions, unrelated species arrive at similar solutions, each shaped by the same conditions. The repetition is subtle but consistent, suggesting that invisibility in this environment is not an anomaly, but a reliable path. As depth continues to influence form, the idea of a clearly defined body begins to fade. What remains is not absence, but a different kind of presence, one that blends so completely with its surroundings that it becomes difficult to separate creature from environment. And in that merging, survival is sustained not through strength or display, but through the quiet act of almost disappearing. In the absence of sunlight, illumination does not disappear entirely. It changes origin. Instead of descending from above, it begins to emerge from within living bodies, appearing in brief, controlled moments that punctuate the surrounding darkness. Some squids carry this ability in precise arrangements across their skin, along their mantle, arms, or underside. Small structures known as photophores produce light through a chemical reaction, combining luciferin with oxygen, guided by enzymes that regulate the intensity and duration. The result is a glow that can be steady or fleeting, soft or sharply defined, depending on how it is used. This light is not wasteful. It is measured, shaped, and often restrained. In many cases, the glow serves a purpose that seems counterintuitive at first. Rather than drawing attention, it helps the squid avoid it. From below, even the faintest trace of downwelling light can reveal a silhouette. A body passing overhead interrupts that dim glow, creating contrast that predators can detect. To counter this, certain squids produce light along their underside that closely matches the brightness above them. This process, known as counter-illumination, reduces the shadow they would otherwise cast. Instead of appearing as a dark shape against a lighter background, they blend into the faint light field, becoming far less distinct. The precision required for this is remarkable. Sensors along the body detect ambient light levels, allowing the squid to adjust its own output in real time. If the surrounding brightness shifts, the glow shifts with it, maintaining a consistent balance. The body becomes an active surface, responding continuously to its environment, not by changing color, but by creating light where none exists. In other species, the use of bioluminescence takes on different forms. Some release brief flashes, sudden and localized, disrupting the visual field of nearby predators. These bursts do not linger. They appear and vanish in an instant, leaving behind no clear trace of the squid's position. Others produce slow pulses, gentle waves of light that travel across their bodies, possibly used to signal or to confuse. There are even squids that release glowing material into the water, a luminous cloud that drifts away while the animal itself moves in another direction. Unlike the dense ink used in shallower regions, this light does not obscure through darkness, but through distraction, creating a momentary shift in attention. Within these adaptations, the role of light changes entirely. It is no longer a passive element of the environment, but something that can be generated, controlled, and shaped. The squid does not depend on external illumination to define its presence. Instead, it decides when to be visible and when to dissolve into the surrounding darkness. Producing light requires energy, and in a place where energy is limited, this cost must be carefully managed. The glow is used sparingly, activated only when necessary, then withdrawn. The mechanisms that control it are tightly regulated, ensuring that no excess is wasted. Across distant habitats, unrelated species have developed similar systems, each refining the balance between visibility and concealment. The repetition suggests that in these depths, creating light becomes as important as avoiding it. As bodies adapt to this environment, illumination becomes internalized, folded into the organism itself. The boundary between creature and environment shifts once more, no longer defined by contrast or absence, but by a controlled exchange of light. In this quiet interplay, visibility is no longer fixed. It is something that can be adjusted, reduced, or briefly revealed, depending on what the moment requires. And within that control, survival continues, guided not by constant presence, but by the careful use of something that was once beyond reach. Long before the body fully abandons its familiar form, the eyes begin to change in ways that seem disproportionate to everything around them. They expand beyond what the rest of the animal suggests, growing larger, rounder, and more prominent, as if vision itself has been given priority over all else. In these depths, sight does not disappear, but it becomes something far more delicate. The light that remains is no longer broad or continuous. It exists in traces, in faint gradients, in distant glimmers that may last only a moment. To detect such subtle signals, the eye must gather as much information as possible. Increasing its size allows more light to enter, widening the aperture through which the environment can be perceived. As a result, some squids develop eyes that dominate their bodies, occupying a significant portion of their head. The structure of the retina adapts as well, becoming more sensitive to low levels of illumination. Photoreceptor cells are arranged to capture even the slightest variation, allowing movement to be sensed where clarity is absent. What they perceive is not a detailed image, but a shifting field of contrasts. A distant flicker, a passing shadow, a brief interruption in an otherwise uniform darkness, these become the signals that guide behavior. The eye does not seek color or fine detail, but presence and change. It is tuned to detect what is barely there, responding to movement that might otherwise go unnoticed. In some species, the eyes are not symmetrical. One may be larger than the other, oriented upward, while its counterpart remains smaller and directed downward. This arrangement reflects the different visual challenges within the same space. Above, faint light may still filter through distant layers, requiring sensitivity to subtle brightness. Below, the environment may rely more on detecting isolated flashes or bioluminescent signals. The squid, in this way, carries two distinct visual systems within a single body, each adapted to a different direction. Maintaining such eyes requires significant resources. Tissue must be supported, neural pathways must process incoming information, and energy must be allocated to sustain constant readiness. In an environment where resources are limited, this investment is substantial. Other aspects of the body often adjust in response, becoming lighter, less dense, or reduced in complexity to offset the cost. The balance is precise. Larger eyes provide greater sensitivity, but they also increase exposure. A prominent structure can create a detectable outline, interrupting the very concealment that other adaptations aim to achieve. Some species address this by altering pigmentation around the eye, reducing contrast, or by positioning the eye in a way that minimizes its visibility from certain angles. Even the lens and internal structures are shaped to maximize efficiency. The curvature of the lens is adjusted to gather light more effectively, while the arrangement of cells minimizes scattering. Every component is refined to ensure that as much information as possible is captured from the faintest sources. As depth continues to influence form, the eye becomes less about seeing clearly and more about sensing presence. It operates at the threshold of visibility, where detection depends on sensitivity rather than resolution. The world it interprets is incomplete, built from fragments of light and motion that must be understood without certainty. Across different regions, this enlargement of the eye appears again and again, suggesting a consistent response to the same conditions. The repetition is not exact, but the direction remains clear, guided by the need to perceive what little remains. In these quiet depths, vision persists not through clarity, but through adaptation, expanding beyond familiar proportions to meet an environment where even the smallest signal carries meaning. There comes a depth where pursuit begins to lose its advantage, not because prey disappears, but because the cost of chasing it grows too high. Movement, once rapid and decisive, begins to stretch into longer pauses, as if the body itself is reconsidering each action before it unfolds. In these layers, some squids no longer rely on continuous motion to find food. Instead of scanning wide spaces and accelerating toward distant targets, they adopt a quieter approach, allowing the surrounding water to carry possibilities toward them. Their bodies adjust to this change in strategy. Fins that once supported swift propulsion now move with slow, steady undulations, maintaining position rather than driving speed. Arms extend outward with less tension, drifting in gentle arcs that increase the chance of contact with passing organisms. The entire posture becomes more open, less directed, as if the squid is no longer navigating towards something, but waiting within the path of what may arrive. This shift reflects a deeper constraint. Energy, already limited, must be used with precision. Each burst of movement requires oxygen, muscle activity, and recovery, all of which draw from reserves that cannot be easily replaced. By reducing unnecessary motion, these squids conserve what they have, extending their ability to survive in an environment where opportunities are infrequent. Feeding becomes less about pursuit and more about interception. Small organisms drifting through the water column become primary targets. Instead of chasing, the squid positions itself within currents that carry these particles. When contact occurs, the response is swift but brief, a controlled movement that captures what is within reach without triggering extended effort. Some species refine this further by incorporating structures that increase their effective range. Longer, thinner appendages may extend beyond the central body, moving almost independently, guided by subtle muscular adjustments. These extensions increase the area through which prey can be encountered, functioning as a quiet network of contact points rather than tools of active grasping. The result is a method of feeding that depends on patience. Time replaces speed as the dominant factor. Rather than expending energy to locate prey, the squid allows the environment to deliver it. This does not guarantee success, but it reduces the risk of depletion, maintaining a balance between intake and expenditure. Even the internal systems reflect this change. Metabolism slows, reducing the rate at which energy is consumed. Heart rate, oxygen usage, and muscular activity all adjust to support a more measured existence. The body becomes tuned to endurance rather than intensity, favoring consistency over bursts of action. This does not mean these squids are passive. They remain responsive, capable of sudden movement when necessary, but such actions are reserved for specific moments. The baseline state is one of stillness, punctuated by brief, efficient responses that accomplish what is needed without excess. Across different regions, this transition appears in varied forms, yet the pattern remains consistent. Species that once relied on speed gradually adopt behaviors that emphasize conservation. The shift is not abrupt, but it is clear, shaped by the same underlying limitations. In this environment, survival is not determined by how quickly one can move, but by how little movement is required. The water itself becomes part of the feeding process, carrying both risk and opportunity in equal measure. By aligning with its flow rather than resisting it, these squids integrate their behavior into the larger system around them. And in that integration, the act of hunting changes from pursuit into presence, where remaining still becomes just as effective as motion once was. Far below the levels where most animals remain active, there exists a layer where oxygen thins to a quiet minimum. In this region, respiration itself becomes a constraint, shaping what kinds of life can endure and how they must behave to continue. Within these waters, the vampire squid moves with a stillness that reflects the conditions around it. Its body is dark, often appearing deep red or near black, a coloration that merges with the surrounding dimness. A thin webbing connects its arms, forming a soft cloak that can fold inward or expand outward, altering its shape without sudden motion. The overall form feels contained, compact, as though designed to operate within strict limits. Unlike many of its relatives, it does not rely on active hunting. The scarcity of oxygen places a natural boundary on how much energy can be used at any given moment. Rapid movement, prolonged pursuit, and sustained exertion would quickly exceed what the environment can support. Instead, the vampire squid follows a different approach, one that aligns closely with the slow rhythms of its surroundings. It feeds on what drifts. Organic material descends from above in a continuous but uneven fall, composed of fragments from distant life. Tiny particles, decaying matter, and microscopic organisms gather into loose aggregates that move gradually through the water column. This suspended material becomes the primary source of nourishment. To collect it, the vampire squid extends two long, delicate filaments. These structures reach outward beyond the shorter arms, almost thread-like in appearance, drifting freely until they encounter passing particles. When contact occurs, the filaments retract slowly, drawing the collected material inward. The process is careful and deliberate, requiring minimal effort while capturing what is available. Once gathered, the material is transferred to the mouth using small movements of the arms, each action controlled and efficient. There is no need for speed, no sudden grasping, or forceful capture. The entire sequence unfolds with a measured consistency that reflects the limited resources of the environment. Even its metabolism is adapted to this constraint. The rate at which energy is used remains low, supported by specialized blood pigments that bind oxygen more effectively than in many other cephalopods. This allows the vampire squid to function in conditions that would challenge most species, maintaining activity without requiring high levels of oxygen intake. Its buoyancy is also finely balanced. Rather than expending energy to maintain position, it achieves near-neutral buoyancy, allowing it to remain suspended with minimal effort. Gentle adjustments of its fins are enough to stabilize its orientation, keeping it within favorable currents where organic material is more likely to pass. When disturbed, Its response differs from the rapid escape behaviors seen elsewhere. Instead of fleeing with speed, it may invert its webbed arms over its body, forming a protective posture that conceals more vulnerable areas. Small, light-producing organs can emit faint glows along the arm tips, creating subtle points of illumination that shift attention away from its central form. These responses remain restrained, used sparingly, consistent with the need to conserve energy at all times. Across distant regions, similar conditions give rise to comparable strategies, yet the vampire squid represents one of the clearest expressions of this adaptation. It exists not by overcoming the limitations of its environment, but by aligning with them completely. In this low oxygen layer, life continues in a slower register where movement, feeding, and even presence itself are shaped by what is available. And within that stillness, the vampire squid persists, sustained by the quiet descent of distant life, gathered one fragment at a time. In water where darkness is no longer broken by external light, the idea of releasing a dark cloud begins to lose its purpose. Ink, once an effective way to obscure movement, depends on contrast, on the ability to create a temporary barrier that interrupts vision. When the surrounding space is already dim, that barrier becomes less distinct, dissolving into the same low visibility it was meant to exploit. For some squids, this shift leads to a different kind of defense. Instead of releasing pigment, they produce light. Specialized organs generate luminous material that can be expelled into the water in controlled bursts. These emissions do not spread as dense, opaque clouds, but as glowing forms that drift and disperse, holding their brightness for a short time before fading. Suspended in the water, they create a momentary presence that draws attention away from the animal itself. The effect is subtle, yet effective. A predator approaching in near darkness relies on detecting movement or faint changes in brightness. When a squid releases a luminous cloud, the visual field becomes altered. The glowing material forms a shifting pattern, breaking the continuity of the space. In that brief interval, the predator's focus shifts toward the light, allowing the squid to move away with minimal detection. This response does not rely on speed. It relies on timing and placement, on introducing a visual signal at the exact moment it becomes most useful. The squid does not need to outrun its pursuer, only to create enough confusion to reduce the chance of being followed. The luminous material itself is often composed of secretions that contain light-producing compounds activated upon release. In some species, these particles can remain visible for several seconds, drifting slowly as they lose intensity. During that time, they function as a temporary decoy, occupying the space the squid once held. In addition to these clouds, some squids can emit directed flashes from their bodies. These flashes may occur in rapid succession, illuminating specific regions of the water for an instant before disappearing. The sudden appearance of light, followed by immediate darkness, disrupts the continuity of perception. A predator expecting consistent signals is briefly presented with something unexpected, a shift that can interrupt its tracking. Over time, this strategy becomes integrated into the squid's behavior. Rather than relying on a single method of escape, it combines controlled movement with the selective use of light. The body remains relatively still until the moment of response, conserving energy while maintaining readiness. When the need arises, the release of light is precise, limited to what is necessary. The transition from ink to illumination reflects a broader adjustment. As the environment changes, the tools used for survival must also change. What once functioned effectively in brighter regions becomes less reliable, and new solutions emerge that align with the conditions at hand. Across different lineages, this pattern appears independently, suggesting that the use of light as a defensive measure is not isolated. It arises wherever darkness reduces the effectiveness of concealment through shadow. Even the internal structures associated with ink may become reduced or modified, no longer central to survival. In their place, systems that produce and control light take on greater importance, integrated into the body with the same precision seen in other adaptations. Within this quiet exchange, defense is no longer about hiding behind darkness, but about shaping it. The squid introduces brief illumination into an otherwise uniform space, altering how it is perceived, then withdrawing before that perception can settle. The moment passes quickly, leaving the water as it was, while the animal has already moved beyond it. And in that fleeting glow, the boundary between visibility and concealment shifts once more, guided by a response that exists only for as long as it is needed. At greater depth, the idea of a firm, defined body begins to give way to something softer, as if structure itself is being gently dissolved by the surrounding conditions. The outlines of these squids remain, but the substance within them changes, becoming less dense, less rigid, and far more delicate than anything found above. Their bodies take on a gelatinous quality. Muscle, once responsible for rapid propulsion and controlled bursts of motion, becomes reduced. It does not disappear entirely, but it is no longer the dominant component. In its place, a more flexible, water-rich tissue begins to define the form, allowing the squid to exist with minimal resistance against the immense pressure that surrounds it. This shift is not a loss, but a refinement. In an environment where compression is constant, rigid structures can become a liability. A softer body distributes pressure more evenly, avoiding the strain that might otherwise disrupt internal systems. By aligning its composition more closely with the density of the surrounding water, the squid reduces the difference between itself and its environment. It does not push against the pressure, it yields to it. This yielding extends beyond structure into movement. With less muscle mass, rapid propulsion becomes less common. Instead, motion is subtle, almost suspended, guided by slight adjustments rather than forceful action. The squid drifts, maintaining position with minimal effort, its body responding to the slow currents that pass through its space. Fins, where present, move with a quiet rhythm, just enough to stabilize orientation or shift direction gently. Arms trail behind or extend outward without tension, following the flow rather than resisting it. Every aspect of movement becomes economical, shaped by the need to conserve energy while remaining responsive. Internally, the organization of tissues reflects the same principle. Organs are often compact and simplified, arranged to minimize unnecessary mass. Cavities may contain fluids that closely match the surrounding pressure, reducing internal gradients that could create stress. The entire body becomes a balanced system, where each component contributes to maintaining equilibrium rather than generating force. Transparency may still appear in some forms, but even where it does not, the body lacks the firmness that would create sharp boundaries. Edges blur slightly, surfaces appear softer, and the distinction between solid and fluid becomes less pronounced. This fragility is not weakness. It is a form of stability suited to a place where strength, as it is understood elsewhere, offers little advantage. A delicate structure can endure where a rigid one might fail, precisely because it does not resist the conditions around it. Across different species, this transformation repeats with variation, yet the underlying pattern remains consistent. As depth increases, density decreases, and form becomes less about maintaining a fixed shape and more about adapting to constant pressure. The result is a body that appears almost incomplete by familiar standards, lacking the firmness and definition expected of an active organism. Yet within its environment, it functions with quiet precision, sustained by a design that matches its surroundings. In this state, stillness becomes a defining characteristic. Not absolute stillness, but a reduction of unnecessary motion where presence is maintained without continuous effort. The squid exists within the water rather than moving through it, its form integrated into the space it occupies. And as this integration deepens, the boundary between organism and environment grows less distinct, shaped by a structure that no longer needs to assert itself, but simply remain. Energy in the deeper ocean is not absent, but it arrives in fragments, uneven and delayed, shaped by processes that begin far above. What reaches these depths is no longer part of a continuous flow, but a scattered descent, composed of remnants that have already been used once before. Much of it originates as living material near the surface, where sunlight once sustained it. Over time, pieces break away, drifting downward in slow, irregular paths. These particles gather into loose formations, sometimes called marine snow, though their movement is far less uniform than the name suggests. They sink at varying speeds, carried by subtle currents, dispersing as they travel. By the time they arrive, only a fraction remains. Each fragment represents energy that has been diminished, altered, and redistributed. Some are consumed before they descend further, intercepted by organisms inhabiting intermediate layers. Others continue downward, but in smaller quantities, creating a pattern where availability decreases with depth. For the squids that exist here, this limited supply shapes every aspect of life. There is no steady abundance to support constant activity. Instead, energy must be conserved, allocated carefully across essential functions. Movement, feeding, and even basic maintenance of the body are balanced against what can realistically be acquired. This constraint leads to a shift in how survival is approached. Rather than maximizing intake through constant effort, these squids minimize expenditure. They reduce unnecessary motion, maintain stable positions, and rely on opportunities that require the least amount of energy to access. Efficiency becomes more important than intensity, guiding behavior towards strategies that preserve reserves. The internal systems reflect this adjustment. Metabolic rates decrease, allowing the body to function on smaller amounts of energy over longer periods. Processes that would typically operate at higher speeds are slowed, extending their duration while reducing their cost. This creates a rhythm of activity that is more measured, less frequent, yet sustained over time. Feeding itself becomes an event that must be optimized. When food is encountered, it is utilized fully with minimal waste. Digestive systems are adapted to extract as much value as possible from what is consumed, ensuring that each opportunity contributes meaningfully to survival. There is little margin for loss, as replacement is not guaranteed. This environment also influences growth and development. Some species grow more slowly, reaching maturity over extended periods. Others may remain smaller, reducing the energy required to maintain their bodies. Reproduction may occur less frequently, timed to coincide with periods when conditions allow for greater success. Across these patterns, a consistent principle emerges. Life continues, but it does so within strict, energetic boundaries. Every adaptation, whether in behavior, structure, or physiology, reflects the need to balance what is used with what can be obtained. Even interactions between organisms are shaped by this limitation. Encounters are less frequent, and when they occur, they are often brief. There is little excess energy to sustain prolonged activity, so actions tend to be direct and efficient, focused on achieving a specific outcome without unnecessary extension. In this way, the deeper ocean becomes a place defined not by absence, but by careful use. Energy is present, but it must be gathered slowly, used sparingly, and conserved wherever possible. The result is a form of life that operates at a different pace, one that aligns with the steady, downward movement of the resources it depends on. And within that pace, survival is maintained through balance, where efficiency replaces abundance, and every action is shaped by the quiet limits of what is available. In open water, far from structure, there are fewer boundaries to define distance. No reefs, no seafloor contours, no fixed reference points interrupt the space. Movement here unfolds without obstruction. And yet, within this openness, speed begins to lose its urgency. Near the surface, rapid motion often determines survival. Obstacles are numerous, encounters frequent, and escape depends on immediate response. But as depth increases and the environment expands into uninterrupted volume, the nature of interaction begins to shift. Encounters become less predictable. Without dense populations or constant visual cues, the likelihood of crossing paths with another organism decreases. Movement through this space does not guarantee contact, and chasing across distance carries no assurance of success. Each burst of speed becomes a gamble, expending energy without certainty of return. Over time, this changes how squids move. Rather than maintaining readiness for sudden acceleration, many begin to favor positions that require little adjustment. They orient themselves within slow currents, allowing the surrounding water to determine their drift. Motion becomes a matter of alignment rather than propulsion, guided by subtle shifts instead of forceful bursts. The body reflects this transition. Fins move in steady, measured patterns, stabilizing rather than driving. The mantle, once a source of rapid jet propulsion, contracts less frequently, reserved for moments that demand immediate change. Most of the time, it remains still, conserving energy while maintaining balance within the water column. This does not eliminate movement, but it transforms its purpose. Instead of crossing large distances quickly, squids adjust their position in small increments. They remain within favorable zones, where passing organisms or drifting material are more likely to appear. The emphasis shifts from covering space to occupying it efficiently. With this change, the act of hunting evolves as well. Pursuit gives way to ambush. Rather than detecting prey at a distance and moving toward it, the squid allows prey to approach. It maintains a position that maximizes the chance of encounter, responding only when something comes within reach. This approach requires patience. Time replaces speed as the primary factor in success. The squid does not need to move constantly to find food, only to remain where food is likely to pass. When contact occurs, the response is brief and controlled, capturing what is available without initiating extended movement. Predators follow a similar pattern. In a space where continuous motion is costly, even those that hunt must do so efficiently. Rapid chases are less common, replaced by strategies that rely on remaining undetected until the moment of action. The entire system begins to favor stillness, punctuated by precise, minimal movements. As a result, the value of speed diminishes. It is not entirely absent, but it is no longer the dominant trait. The ability to move quickly remains useful in specific situations, yet it is secondary to the ability to conserve energy and maintain position over time. Across different species, this pattern emerges repeatedly. Forms that once emphasized streamlined bodies for fast travel begin to adopt shapes and behaviors that support stability instead. The water becomes less of a space to move through and more of a medium to exist within, where presence matters more than motion. In this environment, survival depends not on how fast one can respond, but on how effectively one can remain. The open water, vast and uninterrupted, reduces the need for urgency. It encourages a slower pace where movement is measured and stillness becomes an advantage rather than a limitation. And within that stillness, life continues, shaped by a space where speed no longer defines success. Depth brings with it a force that is never seen, yet always present, increasing steadily with every descent. It does not arrive in waves or sudden impacts, but as a constant weight pressing from all directions at once, shaping every structure that exists within it. Water, though fluid, carries mass, and that mass accumulates above anything living below. As distance from the surface grows, so does the pressure, rising to levels that would collapse air-filled spaces and fracture rigid forms. The change is gradual, yet its effects are profound, influencing not just how bodies function, but what kinds of bodies can exist at all. For squids inhabiting these depths, structure must align with this condition. Rigid elements become increasingly difficult to maintain. Any internal cavity that contains gas would compress under the surrounding force, destabilizing the organism. Even denser materials, if too inflexible, risk becoming points of weakness, unable to distribute the pressure evenly across the body. As a result, solidity begins to fade. Instead of maintaining firm, resistant shapes, many squids develop bodies that are soft, pliable, and continuous in composition. Tissue becomes more uniform, reducing sharp contrasts between different densities. This allows pressure to pass through the body without creating stress points, maintaining stability through consistency. The absence of rigid structures is not accidental. It is a necessary response to an environment where resistance leads to strain. By eliminating elements that would oppose compression, the squid ensures that its internal and external pressures remain balanced. There is no sudden force acting on a single point, only a steady equilibrium maintained across the entire form. Movement adjusts alongside structure. Without firm support, rapid acceleration becomes less practical. Instead, motion relies on subtle shifts where the body flexes and responds to the surrounding water without creating strong opposing forces. The squid does not push against its environment with intensity, but moves within it, allowing pressure to remain evenly distributed. Even at the microscopic level, this balance is preserved. Cells and tissues contain fluids that closely match the density of the surrounding seawater, reducing differences that could lead to compression or expansion. Proteins and membranes are arranged to function under high pressure, maintaining their structure without becoming rigid or brittle. This adaptation extends to sensory systems as well. Organs that detect changes in the environment must operate without relying on air-filled spaces or delicate structures that could collapse. Instead, they are built to function within the same pressure as the surrounding water, ensuring that perception remains stable even as conditions intensify. Across different species, this pattern appears with consistency. Bodies become less defined by hardness and more by flexibility. Edges soften, internal structures simplify, and the distinction between solid and fluid becomes less pronounced. The squid, in essence, adopts a form that mirrors the properties of its environment. This transformation is not immediate. It develops gradually as depth increases, with each layer reinforcing the same principle. The deeper the environment, the greater the advantage of a body that does not resist the forces acting upon it. In this way, pressure does not simply limit what is possible. It guides the direction of adaptation, shaping organisms into forms that can exist within its constant presence. For these squids, survival is achieved not by overcoming pressure, but by becoming compatible with it. Their bodies do not stand apart from the force surrounding them. Instead, they align with it completely, maintaining balance through softness, continuity, and the absence of rigid constraint. Not all parts of the ocean hold the same breath. In certain depths, the water carries less oxygen than the layers above, forming broad regions where the supply thins to a quiet minimum. These zones do not appear empty, yet they impose a steady constraint on everything that lives within them. Here, respiration becomes a careful process. Oxygen is still present, but in reduced concentrations, often shaped by currents, temperature, and the slow consumption of organic matter as it sinks. Microorganisms and drifting life use what is available, gradually lowering the amount that remains. Over time, this creates expansive layers where oxygen persists at levels that challenge most active organisms. For squids entering these regions, the change is immediate in its effects. Their bodies depend on oxygen to sustain movement, digestion, and basic cellular function. When supply decreases, each of these processes must adjust. The first response is often a reduction in activity, not as a deliberate choice, but as a necessary alignment with what the environment can support. Movement slows, becoming more measured and infrequent. The energetic bursts that require rapid oxygen intake become less viable, replaced by gentle adjustments that draw less from internal reserves. Even the intervals between movements lengthen, creating a rhythm that reflects the limited availability of what fuels it. Internally, the circulatory system adapts to maximize efficiency. Blood pigments in some species bind oxygen more effectively, allowing even small amounts to be captured and transported. This increased affinity ensures that the available oxygen is used fully, extending its impact across the body. Circulation may also become more deliberate, maintaining a steady distribution without unnecessary fluctuation. Metabolism follows a similar pattern of reduction. The rate at which energy is consumed decreases, allowing the squid to function within the narrow limits of its environment. Processes that would normally operate quickly are extended over longer periods, conserving oxygen while maintaining essential functions. This creates a slower internal tempo, one that matches the pace imposed by the surrounding water. Behavior aligns with these physiological changes. Squids in low oxygen zones often remain within specific layers where conditions are stable, avoiding unnecessary transitions that would require additional energy. They maintain positions that allow them to function with minimal adjustment, relying on subtle movements to remain balanced within their environment. Feeding continues, but it does so within these constraints. Encounters with food must be handled efficiently, as digestion itself requires oxygen. By limiting activity and optimizing each feeding event, the squid ensures that intake supports its reduced metabolic demands without exceeding available resources. Across different species, this adaptation appears in varied forms, yet the underlying principle remains consistent. Life does not withdraw from these regions. Instead, it reshapes itself to fit within them, reducing its requirements until they align with what is present. The squid becomes a reflection of its environment, not by resisting its limitations, but by adjusting to them with precision. Even interactions between organisms are influenced by this scarcity. Encounters tend to be brief, with minimal exertion on either side. There is little capacity for prolonged activity, so behaviors remain concise, focused on achieving necessary outcomes without excess movement. In this way, the absence of abundant oxygen does not halt life, but transforms it. The squid continues to exist within these zones, sustained by a balance between intake and use, guided by a steady awareness of its limits. Every motion, every internal process, aligns with the quiet reduction that defines this space. And within that reduction, survival persists, shaped by an environment where even breath itself becomes a measured resource. Color in shallower waters acts as a language of contrast and signal, carried by light that reveals and defines it. As depth increases, that language begins to lose its structure, not through sudden disappearance, but through a gradual narrowing of what can be seen. Each wavelength of light fades at a different rate. Longer wavelengths are absorbed first, diminishing as they travel downward. Among these, red disappears earliest, leaving objects that carry it no longer distinguishable by that color. A surface that once appeared vivid becomes muted, then indistinct, then indistinguishable from the surrounding water. To an observer within these depths, red no longer exists as a visible quality. Instead, it transforms into darkness. A squid bearing deep red pigmentation does not stand out as colored, but rather as a shape that absorbs what little light remains. It becomes a silhouette only when light is present, and in its absence, even that distinction fades. The same trait that once signaled presence now contributes to concealment. As other wavelengths diminish, the range of visible color continues to contract. Blues persist longer, traveling deeper than other forms of light, but even they weaken with distance. Eventually, the environment settles into a limited spectrum where variation becomes subtle and contrast is reduced to faint differences in brightness rather than distinct hues. Within this narrowing field, the function of color begins to shift. It no longer serves as a reliable means of communication or display. Patterns that would be visible near the surface lose their clarity, becoming indistinct against the background. The ability to change color, once a dynamic form of interaction, becomes less effective in a space where there is little light to reveal it. In response, many squids adopt coloration that aligns with these conditions. Dark tones, particularly those that absorb the remaining light, become more common. Black surfaces reduce reflectivity, minimizing the chance of detection by any available illumination. The body does not reflect or scatter light, but instead blends into the surrounding darkness through absence. At the same time, transparency continues to play a role. Where color fails to provide concealment, the reduction of visible structure offers an alternative. By allowing light to pass through rather than interact with the body, these squids avoid creating contrast altogether. The absence of color becomes as significant as the presence of it once was. Even internal coloration adjusts. Pigments within tissues may be reduced or reorganized, minimizing their impact on visibility. Structures that would create contrast are either concealed or altered, ensuring that the body remains as neutral as possible within its environment. Across different species, this transition appears with consistency. Color does not disappear entirely, but it becomes secondary, losing its central role in defining appearance. What remains is a simplified visual field where brightness, shadow, and absence replace the complexity of hue. In this environment, perception itself changes. Vision no longer interprets a world of varied colors, but one of gradients and faint distinctions. Organisms respond not to vivid signals, but to subtle shifts in light and form, adjusting their own bodies accordingly. The result is a transformation where color, once a defining feature of life, becomes less relevant. It does not vanish, but it ceases to carry the same meaning. Its purpose diminishes, replaced by strategies that rely on blending, absorbing, or allowing light to pass without interruption. And within this quiet reduction, the visual identity of these squids is reshaped, guided not by what can be seen, but by what no longer can. Where food arrives in scattered traces rather than steady supply, the way it is gathered begins to change in quiet but noticeable ways. The familiar arrangement of arms, once used for swift capture and controlled grasping, starts to extend beyond its original proportions, adapting to a space where contact is rare and opportunity must be expanded. Some squids develop appendages that are longer and thinner than those seen above. These extensions reach outward into the surrounding water, increasing the area through which prey or drifting material might be encountered. They do not move with force, but with a gentle responsiveness, adjusting their position through subtle muscular control while remaining largely suspended. The structure of these arms reflects their purpose. Rather than emphasizing strength, they favor reach and sensitivity. Suckers may become smaller or more widely spaced, arranged to detect and secure whatever comes into contact with them. In certain species, specialized filaments extend even further, trailing behind or drifting ahead, functioning as delicate lines that intercept passing particles. Feeding, in this context, becomes less direct. Instead of pursuing prey and capturing it through rapid movement, the squid allows contact to occur within its extended range. When something brushes against these structures, the response is immediate but contained. The appendage retracts slowly, guiding the captured material inward without initiating broader motion. This method reduces energy use while increasing the likelihood of successful encounters. Over time, these strategies become more refined. Some squids develop adhesive surfaces that can hold small organisms without requiring strong grip. Others rely on subtle chemical cues, sensing the presence of organic material through contact rather than sight. The arms become not only tools of capture, but extensions of perception, interpreting the environment through touch. In certain cases, feeding behavior appears almost passive. The squid positions itself within currents that carry suspended matter, extending its appendages into the flow. As particles drift by, they are collected gradually, forming a slow but consistent intake. The process unfolds without urgency, aligned with the movement of the water itself. Internal adaptations support this approach. Mouth parts and digestive systems adjust to handle smaller, more fragmented sources of food. Instead of processing larger prey items, they become efficient at extracting nutrients from fine material, ensuring that even minimal intake contributes to survival. Across different species, variations of these strategies appear, each shaped by the same constraints. Where direct capture becomes inefficient, extension and interception take its place. The arms, once instruments of rapid action, transform into structures that expand presence, increasing the chance of contact without requiring pursuit. This transformation alters the overall silhouette of the squid. Longer appendages create a form that appears more diffuse, less compact, extending into the surrounding space rather than remaining tightly contained. Movement becomes less about directing the entire body and more about adjusting individual parts, each responding to local conditions. Even coordination shifts. Instead of synchronized, forceful motion, the arms operate with a degree of independence, responding to contact or current with localized adjustments. The body remains largely still, while its extensions engage with the environment in subtle, continuous ways. Within this arrangement, feeding becomes a process of integration rather than action. The squid does not actively seek out food in the traditional sense, but becomes part of the pathway through which food moves. Its appendages create a presence within the water, intercepting what passes through that space. And in that quiet expansion, the act of feeding is reshaped, guided by reach, sensitivity, and the steady movement of the environment itself. Predators do not disappear in deeper water, but they become less frequent, more dispersed, and shaped by the same constraints that influence everything else. The space between encounters widens, and yet when those encounters occur, their consequences remain immediate and decisive. In this environment, absence does not imply safety. The low density of life means that individuals may drift for long periods without crossing paths. Movement through the water does not guarantee interaction, and much of existence unfolds without interruption. But when a predator does appear, it is often highly adapted, refined by the same pressures that limit all activity here. These predators are not built for constant pursuit. Instead, they are specialized for detecting the smallest signals, capable of sensing faint disturbances, subtle shifts, or minimal traces left behind by passing organisms. Their strategies rely on efficiency, conserving energy while remaining ready for the rare moment when opportunity presents itself. Because encounters are infrequent, each one carries greater importance. There is little redundancy in this system. A missed opportunity may not be quickly replaced, and a successful capture may need to sustain the predator for extended periods. As a result, both predator and prey are shaped by the need to respond effectively within a narrow window of interaction. For squids, this creates a distinct challenge. They cannot rely on frequent escapes or repeated attempts to avoid danger. Instead, survival depends on reducing the likelihood of detection in the first place. The goal shifts from reacting to threats toward minimizing the chance that a threat will emerge at all. This leads to a collection of strategies centered on subtlety. Bodies become less conspicuous, avoiding sharp outlines or strong contrasts. Movement is controlled and limited, reducing the disturbances that might draw attention. Even the timing of activity may adjust, aligning with periods when detection is less likely. Stillness becomes a form of defense. By remaining nearly motionless, a squid reduces the signals it produces. Water displacement is minimized, and visual cues are kept to a minimum. In a space where predators rely on detecting faint changes, the absence of change itself becomes protective. When movement is necessary, it is often brief and carefully directed. Rather than sustained motion, squids use short adjustments, repositioning themselves without creating extended trails or patterns. Each action is contained, avoiding unnecessary exposure while maintaining the ability to respond. Sensory awareness also plays a role. Squids must detect potential threats within the same limited conditions that constrain vision and perception. Their systems are tuned to recognize subtle cues, allowing them to respond before a predator closes the distance. This early detection, even if imprecise, provides a critical advantage. Across different species, these adaptations appear with variation, yet they follow a consistent direction. As encounters become rarer, the emphasis shifts toward prevention rather than escape. The squid does not wait to react, but instead maintains a presence that is difficult to notice, blending into its surroundings through reduced visibility and controlled behavior. Predators, in turn, refine their own methods, creating a balance where both sides operate at the edge of detection. The interaction between them is brief, often resolved quickly, leaving little trace behind. There are no prolonged chases, no extended sequences of pursuit, only moments where one detects the other and the outcome unfolds within that narrow span. In this quiet dynamic, survival is shaped by what remains unseen. The squid persists, not through confrontation, but through absence, reducing its presence within the environment until it becomes difficult to distinguish from the space it occupies. And within that reduced presence, it moves through a world where encounters are rare, but never without consequence. At certain depths, light is no longer a background condition, but a deliberate act. It appears not as a continuous field, but as isolated events, brief and controlled, each one carrying potential meaning within a space otherwise defined by darkness. Some squids begin to use this light not only for concealment or defense, but as a form of signaling. Across their bodies, photophores are arranged in patterns that can be activated in sequences. These patterns are not random. They unfold with timing and repetition, forming pulses, waves, or sudden flashes that travel along the mantle or arms. Each variation alters how the light is perceived, creating distinctions that can be recognized by others of the same kind. The signals are often subtle. Rather than bright illumination, they tend to remain faint, just enough to be detected within a limited range. This reduces the chance of drawing unwanted attention while still allowing communication to occur. The squid controls both intensity and duration, shaping each signal to match the conditions around it. In some cases, the patterns repeat with consistency. A sequence of pulses may occur at regular intervals, establishing a rhythm that can be recognized over time. In others, the signals change more fluidly, adjusting in response to nearby movement or presence. The flexibility of this system allows for variation without requiring large amounts of energy. The arrangement of photophores contributes to this complexity. Positioned along different parts of the body, they can be activated independently or in coordination. A signal may begin near the head and move outward, or appear simultaneously across multiple regions. The body becomes a surface capable of producing structured light, each point contributing to a larger pattern. This form of signaling likely serves multiple purposes. It may help individuals recognize one another within a space where visibility is limited. It may assist in coordinating movement during brief encounters, or in maintaining distance without physical contact. The exact meanings remain difficult to determine, but the presence of consistent patterns suggests that these signals are not without function. Timing plays a critical role. Signals are often brief, appearing and disappearing before they can be easily tracked. This reduces exposure while preserving the ability to communicate. The squid does not maintain a continuous display, but introduces light in moments that balance visibility with concealment. In some species, the signals appear to respond to external cues. The presence of another organism, a change in position, or a shift in the surrounding environment may trigger specific patterns. This responsiveness suggests a level of interaction that extends beyond simple emission, allowing the squid to adjust its signals in relation to what it encounters. Across different regions, similar uses of light emerge independently. Species that are not closely related develop comparable signaling systems, each shaped by the same constraints of darkness and limited visibility. The repetition of this behavior indicates that light in these depths becomes one of the few reliable ways to convey information. Unlike color or shape, which depend on external illumination, Bioluminescence provides its own source. This allows communication to occur even when no ambient light is present, creating a channel that remains functional regardless of depth. The squid does not rely on what the environment offers, but generates its own means of expression. Within this system, communication becomes an extension of adaptation. Light is no longer only a tool for hiding or confusing, but a medium through which presence can be shared, however briefly. Each signal exists for a moment, then fades, leaving the water unchanged. And within those fleeting patterns, a quiet exchange takes place, shaped by timing, structure, and the careful use of illumination in a space where little else can be seen. Sound does not vanish in deeper water, but its role begins to shift, becoming less central to how organisms interpret their surroundings. The vastness of the open ocean changes how vibrations travel, stretching them across distance until they lose the clarity needed to guide precise responses. Nearer to the surface, sound can carry signals between organisms, reflecting off boundaries and returning with information about nearby structures. In deeper regions, those boundaries become scarce. The water extends outward without interruption, and the echoes that once defined space grow faint or indistinct. Within this quiet, squids begin to rely less on acoustic cues. Their bodies do not depend heavily on hearing in the way some other marine animals do, yet even subtle sensitivity to vibration becomes less informative when signals disperse over distance. Instead of interpreting distant sounds, these squids focus on cues that exist closer to their immediate position. Touch begins to take on a greater role. Their arms, already adapted for extension and contact, function as sensitive surfaces capable of detecting slight changes in movement or pressure. When something passes nearby, it creates a disturbance in the water that can be felt before it is seen. These disturbances are localized, offering information about proximity without requiring long-range transmission. The arrangement of these sensory structures allows for a distributed form of awareness. Rather than relying on a single point of detection, the squid interprets input across multiple contact points. Each arm contributes to a broader understanding of the surrounding space, building a perception that is assembled from small, immediate signals. Light, when present, becomes another primary source of information, not as a constant illumination, but as brief, controlled emissions that reveal specific moments. Bioluminescent flashes from other organisms, or from the squid itself, provide glimpses of activity that can be interpreted quickly before fading. These flashes do not define the entire environment, but they offer isolated pieces of it. Together, touch and light form a system that operates within short ranges. They provide clarity and proximity rather than distance, allowing the squid to respond to what is near rather than what is far. This aligns with the broader conditions of the environment, where encounters are infrequent and information must be gathered efficiently when it becomes available. Movement is shaped by this sensory balance. Without reliance on distant signals, the squid does not need to respond to far-off stimuli. Instead, it maintains a steady presence, adjusting only when local cues indicate a change. This reduces unnecessary activity, conserving energy while ensuring responsiveness within immediate space. Even interactions between organisms reflect this quiet. Encounters are often silent, defined by subtle contact or brief exchanges of light rather than extended sequences of sound. Communication, when it occurs, remains contained within close range, using methods that do not depend on long-distance transmission. Across different species, this pattern appears with consistency. As depth increases and the environment expands, the effectiveness of sound diminishes and other senses take precedence. The squid adapts by refining its ability to detect what is close, building a perception that is grounded in immediacy rather than reach. This does not create an absence of information. Instead, it changes how information is gathered and interpreted. The environment remains active, but its signals are quieter, more localized, and less continuous. The squid responds by aligning its senses with these conditions, focusing on what can be known within its immediate surroundings. And within this quieter world, awareness persists, shaped by touch, by brief light, and by the steady presence of signals that exist only within reach. Far below the reach of ordinary sight, certain squids develop eyes that seem disproportionate to everything around them, not as an exaggeration, but as a precise response to a world where signals are rare and easily lost. Among these are the giant squid and the colossal squid, species that inhabit some of the deepest accessible waters. Their bodies, already adapted to pressure and limited energy, carry eyes of remarkable size, larger than those of any other known animal. These eyes are not shaped for clarity in bright conditions, but for sensitivity in near absence. The scale of these organs reflects a specific need. In a space where encounters are infrequent, the ability to detect even the faintest movement becomes critical. A distant shift, a subtle change in brightness, or a brief disturbance may be the only indication that something else is present. Larger eyes gather more light, increasing the chance that such signals can be perceived before they fade. The structure of the eye supports this function. A wide pupil allows maximum light entry, while the internal arrangement of photoreceptor cells is tuned to respond to low levels of illumination. The retina prioritizes sensitivity over resolution, capturing faint contrasts rather than detailed images. What is seen is not sharply defined, but it is enough to indicate presence. In these depths, that is sufficient. The eyes of these squids are particularly effective at detecting bioluminescent flashes produced by other organisms. When a predator or prey moves through the water, it may disturb smaller creatures that emit light in response. This chain of reactions creates brief signals that propagate outward, revealing movement indirectly. By detecting these flashes, the squid can interpret events occurring at a distance. It does not need to see the organism itself, only the effects of its movement. This expands its perceptual range, allowing it to respond to activity that would otherwise remain hidden within the darkness. The positioning of the eyes also contributes to their function. Oriented to capture as much of the surrounding space as possible, they provide a broad field of view, increasing the likelihood of detecting rare events. The head accommodates their size, integrating them into the overall structure without compromising the body's balance. Maintaining such large eyes requires significant investment. Tissue must be supported, and neural pathways must process the information received. In an environment where energy is limited, this investment is balanced by reductions elsewhere, ensuring that the overall system remains efficient. The trade-off is clear. Enhanced perception increases the chance of detecting both opportunity and threat, justifying the resources required to sustain it. Without this capability, the squid would rely on chance encounters, reducing its ability to respond effectively within a sparse environment. Across these species, the enlargement of the eye represents a continuation of the same pattern seen in other adaptations. As conditions become more restrictive, certain features expand to compensate for what is lost. In this case, the loss of light leads to an increase in sensitivity, allowing vision to persist even when illumination is minimal. The result is a form of sight that operates at the limits of perception. It does not reveal a detailed world, but it provides enough information to guide behavior, to detect movement, and to interpret the faint signals that pass through the water. Within this quiet environment, where encounters are rare and fleeting, the ability to notice even the smallest change becomes a defining advantage. And through these enlarged eyes, the squid remains connected to its surroundings, perceiving what little can be seen and responding to it with measured precision. Hunting in these depths unfolds without clear outlines or steady illumination, guided instead by brief signals that appear and vanish before they can fully resolve into form. The space between organisms is wide, and the moments in which they intersect are short, requiring strategies that rely on precision rather than persistence. For many squids, this leads to a form of hunting that depends on stillness. Instead of moving through the water in search of prey, they remain positioned within it, allowing the environment to bring opportunities close. Their bodies hold a steady orientation, fins adjusting gently to maintain balance, while the rest of the form remains quiet and composed. This stillness is not passive. It is a deliberate state, one that minimizes disturbance and preserves energy while maintaining readiness. The squid does not broadcast its presence through motion, but waits within the space where interaction might occur. Detection begins with subtle cues. A faint shift in brightness, a localized disturbance, or the brief appearance of light produced by another organism can indicate movement nearby. These signals are often incomplete, offering only partial information, yet they are enough to guide response when interpreted correctly. When prey enters range, the transition from stillness to action is brief. Arms extend or contract with controlled speed, capturing what is within reach without initiating prolonged movement. The response is contained, limited to the immediate area, ensuring that energy is used only where it is effective. This method reduces the need for extended pursuit. By relying on proximity rather than distance, the squid avoids the cost associated with chasing prey across open water. Each successful capture occurs within a small spatial range, where the probability of success is higher and the expenditure is lower. In some species, positioning becomes part of the strategy. They orient themselves in regions where currents or vertical movement of water increase the likelihood of encountering drifting organisms. By aligning with these pathways, they improve the chances of contact without needing to search actively. Feeding, in this context, becomes closely tied to timing. The squid must respond quickly enough to capture prey, yet without overshooting or initiating unnecessary motion. The balance is precise, allowing for effective capture while maintaining the overall stillness that supports survival. Even the internal processes reflect this efficiency. Digestion is adapted to handle smaller, less frequent meals, extracting maximum value from each encounter. The body remains prepared for long intervals between feeding events, sustaining itself through careful allocation of energy. Predators that employ similar strategies contribute to a shared dynamic. Both hunter and prey rely on minimal movement, creating interactions that occur within narrow windows of detection. There is little space for prolonged engagement, only brief moments where one responds to the presence of the other. Across different environments, this pattern repeats. Squids adopt ambush-based approaches not as a preference, but as a response to the conditions that define their world. The scarcity of light and energy shapes a method of hunting that emphasizes patience, precision, and restraint. The result is a system where action is rare but decisive. Long periods of stillness are interrupted by short, efficient movements that accomplish what is necessary without excess. Each encounter is contained, leaving the surrounding space largely undisturbed. Within this quiet method, hunting becomes an extension of the environment itself. The squid does not impose its presence through constant motion, but integrates into the flow of the water, responding only when conditions align. And in that alignment, it sustains itself, guided by a strategy that depends on waiting as much as on acting. What appears delicate at first glance often holds a quiet advantage in deeper water. Structures that seem incomplete or easily disrupted are, in fact, closely aligned with the conditions that surround them, shaped not by weakness, but by careful reduction. Many squids at these depths carry bodies that feel almost insubstantial. Their tissues are thin, their forms lightly held together, lacking the density that would define a more robust structure. There is little excess, no heavy reinforcement, no rigid support that extends beyond what is strictly necessary. Every part of the body reflects a principle of restraint. This restraint serves multiple purposes. By reducing structural mass, the squid lowers the amount of energy required to maintain itself. Less tissue means fewer resources needed for growth, repair, and basic function. In a place where energy arrives slowly and unpredictably, this reduction becomes essential. Movement benefits as well. A lighter body requires less effort to adjust position, allowing the squid to respond to its environment with minimal expenditure. It does not need to overcome its own weight or density to shift within the water. Instead, it moves in small increments, guided by subtle changes rather than forceful actions. Even when motion is absent, this reduced structure provides stability. The squid can remain suspended with little effort, maintaining its position without constant correction. This stillness is not imposed, but supported by a form that naturally aligns with the surrounding medium. Internally, the simplicity continues. Organs are compact, arranged to perform their functions without unnecessary complexity. Systems operate efficiently, with minimal overlap or redundancy. The body becomes a streamlined arrangement where each component contributes directly to survival. This minimalism extends to behavior. Without the capacity or need for sustained activity, the squid adopts a pattern of existence that emphasizes conservation. Actions are brief and purposeful, avoiding prolonged effort. Time between movements is extended, allowing energy to be preserved for when it is most needed. Fragility, in this context, does not imply vulnerability in the conventional sense. While the body may appear delicate, it is suited to a space where force is distributed evenly and sudden impacts are rare. The absence of rigid elements reduces the risk of structural failure under pressure, allowing the squid to maintain integrity within a constant environment. Across different species, similar forms emerge. Though varied in detail, they share a tendency toward reduced density and simplified structure. This convergence suggests that minimalism is not incidental, but a consistent response to the same set of conditions. The surrounding water supports this approach. With buoyancy balanced and resistance minimized, the squid exists within a medium that carries part of its burden. It does not need to build strength to oppose its environment, but instead relies on alignment with it. Feeding, movement, and perception all operate within this framework. Each process is scaled to match the limited resources available, ensuring that nothing exceeds what can be sustained. The result is a system that remains stable over time, even in the absence of abundance. This form of survival is quiet. It does not rely on dominance, speed, or display, but on the careful removal of what is unnecessary. The squid becomes an expression of efficiency, shaped by the gradual elimination of excess. And within that reduction, It persists, not by becoming more complex, but by becoming precisely what the environment allows, no more and no less. Beyond the layers where occasional signals still pass, there are depths where encounters become so infrequent that presence itself feels uncertain, defined more by absence than by activity. It is here that some of the deepest known squids exist, occupying regions where observation is rare and conditions reach their most demanding extremes. These squids belong to the bathypelagic zone, a vast region extending far below the reach of any residual light. The water here holds a stillness that is not empty, but sparsely occupied, with individuals separated by distances that may remain unbridged for long periods. Within this space, form reflects a culmination of all prior adaptations. Bodies are often soft, lightly structured, and carefully balanced to remain suspended without effort. Movement is minimal, not through limitation, but through necessity. Every adjustment is deliberate, ensuring that energy is preserved over extended intervals where replenishment cannot be assumed. Encounters between organisms are rare. A squid may drift for long durations without detecting another presence. When contact does occur, it is brief and decisive, shaped by the need to act efficiently within a limited window. There is little redundancy in these interactions, each one carrying significance that extends beyond the moment itself. Feeding strategies reflect this scarcity. Rather than relying on consistent sources, these squids adapt to irregular availability. They consume what can be captured, often smaller or fragmented material, and process it in ways that maximize its value. Digestion may be extended, extracting nutrients slowly to sustain the body over time. Some species exhibit features that appear unusual when compared to those found above. Appendages may be elongated or arranged in configurations that increase the chance of encountering drifting matter. Sensory systems are tuned to detect minimal cues, allowing the squid to respond to faint signals that indicate the presence of potential food or threat. Bioluminescence, when present, is used sparingly. Light is generated in controlled ways, serving functions that align with the surrounding conditions. It may assist in brief interactions or in maintaining concealment, but it is never excessive. The cost of producing light is balanced carefully against the benefit it provides. Internal systems operate within strict limits. Metabolism remains low, conserving energy across long intervals. Circulatory and respiratory processes are adapted to function under reduced availability of essential resources. The entire organism is calibrated to maintain equilibrium within a space that offers little margin for excess. Across these species, the pattern of adaptation becomes more pronounced. Each feature, whether structural or behavioral, reflects a response to the same constraints. There is little variation that does not serve a clear purpose, and little complexity that cannot be justified by its contribution to survival. Observation of these squids is limited. Their environment is difficult to access, and their presence is not easily detected. Much of what is known comes from brief encounters, moments where they are observed before returning to the surrounding darkness. These glimpses provide insight, but they also leave much unresolved. Despite this, certain consistencies emerge. The deeper the environment, the more pronounced the adaptations become. Forms appear less defined, behaviors more restrained, and systems more focused on efficiency. The squid becomes a precise expression of its conditions, shaped by constraints that allow little deviation. In this region, life persists without abundance. It continues through careful balance, sustained by adaptations that align closely with the limits imposed by depth. Each organism exists within a narrow range of possibility, maintained through strategies that prioritize stability over expansion. And within that quiet, extended space, the deepest squids remain, rarely seen, yet fully adapted to a world that operates at the edge of what can be sustained. What appears unfamiliar is often the result of expectation rather than difference. When a form no longer aligns with what is commonly seen near the surface, it begins to feel unusual, even though each feature follows a clear and consistent purpose. The human sense of familiarity is shaped by environments where light is abundant, movement is frequent, and structure is defined by firmness and symmetry. Within those conditions, certain shapes and behaviors become recognizable, forming a reference for what life is expected to look like. As depth increases, that reference begins to lose relevance. The conditions that once shaped familiar forms no longer apply in the same way. Light is limited, energy arrives slowly, and pressure reshapes what can be maintained. In response, squids adjust, not toward unfamiliarity, but toward efficiency within those constraints. Their appearance changes as a consequence. Bodies become softer, reducing resistance and conserving energy. Appendages extend or thin out, increasing the chance of contact without requiring movement. Eyes enlarge, not for clarity, but for sensitivity. Each feature shifts in proportion and function, guided by the environment rather than by any need to resemble what exists above. From a human perspective, these changes can seem unusual. A body that lacks clear edges or firm structure appears incomplete. Eyes that dominate the form seem disproportionate. Movement that slows or nearly disappears feels unlike the active motion often associated with life. Yet each of these traits follows a direct and logical pattern. They are not distortions, but adjustments. Efficiency becomes the central principle. Every part of the squid is shaped by what it must conserve and what it must detect. There is little space for excess, and no advantage in maintaining features that no longer serve a function. The result is a form that appears simplified, but is in fact highly specialized. Familiarity often depends on symmetry and repetition. When those patterns shift, the form becomes harder to interpret. In deeper waters, symmetry may still exist, but it is less emphasized visually. Structures may be arranged in ways that prioritize function over balanced appearance, creating silhouettes that seem irregular when compared to surface species. Even behavior contributes to this perception. Reduced movement, extended stillness, and brief, precise actions differ from the continuous activity observed in brighter regions. Without constant motion to define presence, the squid may appear static or incomplete, even though it remains fully responsive within its environment. Across different species, similar changes emerge independently. Unrelated squids adopt comparable forms, not because they share a common design, but because they face the same conditions. This repetition suggests that what appears unusual is actually consistent, shaped by the same underlying forces. The sense of strangeness arises from contrast. When viewed against familiar environments, these adaptations stand out. When considered within their own context, they align closely with what is required. The difference lies not in the organisms themselves, but in the perspective used to interpret them. As depth increases, this contrast becomes more pronounced. Each layer introduces further changes, gradually moving away from the conditions that define surface life. With each shift, the resulting forms appear less recognizable, even though they remain fully functional. In this way, the perception of strangeness is not a property of the squid, but a reflection of how it is observed. What seems unusual is simply life responding precisely to a different set of constraints, reshaping itself in ways that no longer match expectations formed elsewhere. And within that reshaping, the unfamiliar becomes consistent, guided by the same quiet logic that defines every adaptation along the descent. Nothing in these depths is moving toward a final design. There is no direction chosen in advance, no preferred outcome waiting at the end of change. What exists instead is a quiet process of adjustment, guided only by whether a form continues to function within the conditions around it. Over time, small variations appear within populations. Some individuals carry slight differences in structure, behavior, or physiology. In environments where resources are limited and constraints are constant, even minor differences can influence survival. Those that align more closely with the surrounding conditions persist, while others gradually diminish. This process unfolds without intention. There is no awareness guiding it, only a continuous filtering shaped by the environment. Each generation reflects what has remained, carrying forward traits that fit within the narrow limits imposed by depth, pressure, and energy availability. As a result, form begins to follow function with increasing precision. Bodies become softer where pressure demands flexibility. Movement slows where energy must be conserved. Sensory systems adjust to detect what little information remains. Each change arises not as a deliberate improvement, but as a response to what is required to continue. Across distant regions, this process repeats. Squids that are not closely related, separated by geography and lineage, begin to resemble one another in certain ways. Their bodies converge towards similar solutions, shaped by the same environmental pressures. This convergence is not exact, but it follows recognizable patterns. Transparency appears in multiple species, not because it is inherited from a common source, but because it reduces visibility in low light conditions. Enlarged eyes emerge, where detecting faint signals becomes essential. Reduced musculature develops where continuous movement is unsustainable. These similarities reflect shared constraints rather than shared ancestry. The environment acts as a consistent force, narrowing the range of viable forms. Within that range, different species arrive at comparable outcomes, each shaped independently, yet guided by the same conditions. This repetition creates a sense of predictability. Given similar circumstances, similar adaptations are likely to emerge. The deeper the environment, the more consistent these patterns become. As the constraints grow more restrictive and the number of viable solutions decreases, there is no excess in this process. Traits that do not contribute to survival tend to diminish over time, replaced by those that align more closely with the environment. The result is a gradual refinement, where forms become increasingly specialized without becoming more complex than necessary. Behavior follows the same path. Patterns of movement, feeding, and interaction adjust in response to what can be sustained. Strategies that conserve energy and reduce exposure become more common, not through choice, but through persistence. Even differences between species reflect variations within a shared framework. Some may emphasize certain traits more than others, depending on local conditions, but the overall direction remains consistent. The environment sets the boundaries, and within those boundaries, variation unfolds. This process does not seek perfection. It does not aim for an ideal form, only for one that continues to function. If conditions change, the process continues, adjusting again to match what is required. In this way, evolution is not a progression towards something defined, but an ongoing response to what exists. The squid, like all organisms in these depths, is shaped by this response, carrying within its form the accumulated adjustments of countless generations. And through that accumulation, patterns emerge, repeated across species and across space, each one reflecting the steady influence of an environment that defines what can remain. As night passes overhead, unseen from below, a quiet movement begins within the water column. It is not sudden or uniform, but gradual, unfolding across vast distances as certain squids rise through the layers they usually inhabit. This movement is part of a daily pattern. Some species travel upward during darker hours, entering regions where conditions differ from those below. When light begins to return above, they descend again, returning to depths that offer greater stability and protection. This vertical migration occurs regularly, linking multiple environments within a single cycle. Each layer presents its own set of conditions. Nearer to the surface, food may be more available, carried by currents that support higher concentrations of life. At greater depths, the environment becomes more controlled, with fewer encounters and reduced exposure. By moving between these layers, the squid accesses different resources while balancing the risks associated with each. This movement requires flexibility. The squid must adjust to changes in pressure, light, and oxygen levels within relatively short periods. Its body is not fixed to a single set of conditions, but capable of functioning across a range of environments. This adaptability is reflected in both physiology and behavior. Internally, systems are regulated to accommodate these shifts. Pressure differences are managed through structures that remain consistent across varying depths, avoiding sudden imbalance. Metabolic processes adjust according to the conditions encountered, increasing or decreasing activity as needed. Oxygen uptake may vary depending on availability, ensuring that the body continues to function without exceeding its limits. Behavior aligns with these changes. During ascent, movement becomes more active, though still measured, allowing the squid to navigate toward regions where food is more abundant. Once there, feeding may occur with greater frequency, taking advantage of the increased availability. As descent begins, activity decreases again, returning to a slower rhythm suited to deeper conditions. Timing is essential. The migration often coincides with changes in light above, even though that light may not reach the depths where the squid begins its movement. Subtle cues, possibly related to internal cycles or environmental signals, guide the timing of ascent and descent, ensuring that transitions occur at appropriate moments. Across different species, variations of this pattern appear. Some travel greater distances, crossing multiple layers within a single cycle. Others move more modestly, shifting only between adjacent zones. In each case, the underlying principle remains consistent, connecting environments that would otherwise remain separate. This connection influences adaptation. Squids that migrate vertically must maintain features that function across varying conditions, rather than specializing exclusively for a single depth. Their bodies reflect a balance between different requirements, allowing them to operate effectively in more than one environment. At the same time, this flexibility introduces constraints. The squid cannot fully optimize for any single set of conditions without compromising its ability to function elsewhere. Instead, it adopts a form that accommodates variation, maintaining stability across a broader range. The result is a dynamic interaction with depth. Rather than remaining fixed within a single layer, these squids move through the vertical structure of the ocean, experiencing shifts in resource availability, pressure, and light within each cycle. Their existence is defined not by a single environment, but by the transitions between them. Within this movement, survival is shaped by balance. The squid gains access to opportunities in one layer while relying on the relative safety of another. By moving between them, it integrates multiple conditions into a single pattern of behavior. And through this repeated ascent and descent, it carries its adaptations across boundaries, maintaining continuity within a world that is layered yet connected. Across the full span of the ocean's depth, few groups display such a continuous range of forms, each one reflecting the conditions it occupies with unusual clarity. Squids appear at many levels, from near the surface to the deepest zones, and within that range, their bodies reveal how quickly and precisely change can occur. Part of this clarity comes from their structure. Unlike organisms with rigid frameworks, squids are built primarily from soft tissue. Their bodies are flexible, lacking hard skeletons that would limit variation in shape. This flexibility allows adjustments to occur more readily over generations, as small changes in proportion or composition do not require the reworking of fixed structures. The result is a form that can shift with fewer constraints. Muscle, connective tissue, and internal systems can be modified gradually, aligning with the demands of each depth. Features such as fin size, arm length, and overall density can adjust without disrupting the entire organism. This creates a continuity of variation where changes appear smoothly across different species. Their distribution also contributes to this pattern. Squids occupy a wide vertical range, extending through multiple layers of the ocean. Because they exist across these gradients, they provide a kind of natural comparison, showing how similar organisms respond to different conditions. One species may inhabit shallower regions, while another, closely related, exists deeper, each reflecting the environment it encounters. This overlap creates a sequence of forms. Rather than isolated examples, there is a progression where each depth reveals a slightly altered version of the same basic structure. The differences accumulate, forming a visible pattern that connects the surface to the deeper layers through gradual change. Adaptability plays a central role. Squids possess systems that allow them to respond quickly to environmental pressures, both in behavior and in long-term development. Their nervous systems support rapid adjustments in movement and interaction, while their physiology accommodates shifts in pressure, light, and resource availability. Over time, this adaptability extends into evolution. Traits that prove effective in a given layer become more common, while others diminish. Because squids can occupy multiple environments, these changes occur across a broader range, making the resulting patterns more apparent. Their life cycles also contribute. Many squids grow quickly and reproduce within relatively short time frames. This allows changes to accumulate over generations at a pace that reflects environmental conditions more directly. The connection between form and environment becomes easier to observe, as adjustments are not spread across extended periods. Across different regions, similar trends emerge. Even when species are separated by distance, their responses to depth follow comparable directions. This repetition reinforces the visibility of the pattern, highlighting how consistent the influence of the environment can be. In contrast, organisms with more rigid structures or narrower distributions may show these changes less clearly. Their forms are constrained by physical limitations or restricted to specific conditions, making variation less continuous. Squids, by comparison, move more freely across these boundaries, allowing their adaptations to form a more complete sequence. The combination of flexibility, distribution, and adaptability creates a unique clarity. Each species becomes a point within a larger gradient, illustrating how form responds to depth. The differences between them are not abrupt, but connected, forming a continuous transition that reflects the changing environment. Within this progression, the underlying process becomes visible. The squid does not transform in isolation, but as part of a broader pattern where each layer shapes what exists within it. And because squids span these layers so completely, their forms reveal that pattern with unusual precision, tracing the influence of depth across the full range of their existence. Beyond the limits of regular observation, the deeper ocean remains a place where knowledge is partial, shaped by brief encounters and incomplete records. What is known has been gathered through moments of access, each one offering a narrow view into a much larger and largely unobserved system. The vast majority of these depths have not been explored directly. Access is difficult, constrained by pressure, distance, and the technical challenges of reaching and observing without disturbance. Instruments descend, record, and return, but their presence is temporary. The environment continues beyond their range, unchanged and largely unseen. Because of this, many squid species are known only from limited encounters. Some have been observed briefly, captured in short recordings before disappearing again into the surrounding space. Others are known from specimens brought to the surface, often altered by the change in pressure, making it difficult to understand their original form and behavior. These glimpses provide information, but they do not form a complete picture. Behavior, in particular, remains difficult to study. Movement patterns, interactions, and feeding strategies are often inferred from short observations rather than continuous tracking. What is seen may represent only a small portion of what occurs over longer periods. Even the number of species remains uncertain. New discoveries continue to emerge, suggesting that many forms have yet to be documented. The diversity of squids at depth is likely greater than what has been recorded, with variations that extend beyond current classification. Technological advances have expanded access, but limitations remain. Remotely operated vehicles and deep-sea cameras allow for longer observation, yet their reach is still restricted. Light introduced by these tools can alter behavior, and their presence may influence what is observed. The environment being studied is sensitive to intrusion, and complete neutrality is difficult to achieve. As a result, much of what is understood is based on fragments. Patterns can be identified, and general principles can be drawn, but the full complexity of these ecosystems remains beyond current reach. Each new observation adds to the understanding, yet also reveals how much remains unknown. This uncertainty extends to how species interact with one another. Encounters are rarely observed in full, leaving gaps in the understanding of relationships between organisms. Predator and prey dynamics, communication methods, and reproductive behaviors are often inferred rather than directly witnessed. Despite these limitations, certain consistencies appear. Adaptations observed across multiple species suggest underlying patterns shaped by depth, pressure, and resource availability. These patterns provide a framework for understanding, even when specific details are incomplete. The absence of complete knowledge does not prevent insight, but it shapes its boundaries. What is known is grounded in observation, while what remains unknown invites further exploration. The balance between these two creates a view that is both detailed and open, defined by what has been seen and what has yet to be revealed. In this way, the deeper ocean remains a place of ongoing discovery. Each descent, each observation, contributes to a growing understanding, yet the scale of what remains unobserved ensures that this understanding is always partial. The squids that inhabit these depths continue to exist beyond direct view, their forms and behaviors shaped by conditions that are only briefly accessible. And within that limited window, knowledge continues to expand, guided by the quiet persistence of exploration into a space that remains largely beyond reach. What remains consistent, even as forms shift and structures soften, is the quiet principle that life continues wherever conditions allow it to persist. Across these depths, where light fades and resources narrow, existence does not diminish. It reshapes itself with careful precision. The changes observed are not random or scattered. They follow patterns that emerge repeatedly, guided by the same constraints that define the environment. Each adjustment reflects a balance between what is available and what is required, creating forms that align closely with their surroundings. In this way, life does not resist its environment, it follows it. Pressure, darkness, and limited energy do not act as barriers alone. They become forces that shape what can exist. As these forces intensify, familiar structures begin to recede, replaced by alternatives that function more effectively under those conditions. What once seemed essential becomes unnecessary. Rigid frameworks give way to flexible forms. Constant movement is replaced by stillness. Visual signals diminish, while other modes of perception take precedence. Each shift reflects a response to what can be sustained, rather than what is expected. The result is a gradual departure from familiar appearances. Forms that align with surface conditions lose their relevance as depth increases. In their place, new configurations emerge, shaped by the need to conserve energy, maintain balance, and remain undetected. These configurations may appear unfamiliar, yet they are consistent with the environment that produces them. Across different species, similar transformations occur. Though separated by distance and lineage, organisms facing comparable conditions adopt related strategies. This convergence suggests that the environment plays a central role, guiding adaptation along predictable paths. The deeper the conditions, the narrower these paths become. With fewer viable options, life adjusts toward a smaller range of forms, each one refined to meet specific constraints. Variation continues, but within boundaries that are defined by the limits of the environment. This process reveals a broader pattern. Life is not fixed to a particular shape or behavior. It does not depend on a single way of existing, but instead adapts continuously, aligning with the conditions it encounters. When those conditions change, life changes with them, maintaining continuity through adjustment. Even in the most extreme regions, this pattern holds. Where pressure is constant and resources are scarce, organisms persist through strategies that prioritize efficiency and stability. The forms that emerge are not diminished versions of those above, but fully adapted expressions of their environment. Familiarity, in this context, becomes less meaningful. What appears recognizable is tied to specific conditions, and when those conditions no longer apply, recognition fades. The underlying processes remain the same, but the outcomes differ, shaped by the surrounding world. This reveals that form is not an independent quality. It is a result produced by the interaction between life and environment. Every structure, every behavior reflects this interaction, carrying within it the influence of the conditions in which it exists. As depth increases, this influence becomes more apparent. The environment imposes stricter limits, and the resulting forms reflect those limits with greater clarity. What remains is a series of adaptations that trace the boundaries of what can be sustained. Within that tracing, life continues, It does not seek to resemble what came before, nor does it move toward a fixed destination. It adjusts, persists, and reshapes itself in response to the world around it, carrying forward a process that remains constant even as its expressions change. And through that process, the deeper ocean reveals a quiet truth that life is defined not by its form, but by its ability to adapt to whatever conditions it encounters. At the end of this descent, the pattern does not scatter or fade. It settles into something quiet and consistent. The forms that seemed unusual at first begin to align, each one fitting precisely within the conditions that shaped it. Nothing here has changed without reason. Every adjustment, from the softening of structure to the slowing of movement, follows a direction set by the environment. Depth does not introduce randomness. It applies pressure in a steady, measurable way, guiding life toward forms that can persist within it. As each layer is crossed, the same process continues. Conditions shift, and with them, the boundaries of what can be sustained. Light diminishes, energy narrows, and physical forces become more constant. In response, the squid adjusts, not abruptly, but through gradual refinement, each change building upon those that came before. This creates a sequence that can be traced. From shallower regions to the deepest zones, forms transition in ways that remain consistent across species. Differences accumulate, yet they do so along a path shaped by the same constraints. The result is not a collection of unrelated variations, but a continuous progression. What appears unfamiliar is part of this progression. When viewed without context, these forms seem distant from those found above. Their structures feel altered, their behaviors reduced or transformed. Yet within their own environment, they represent precise solutions, shaped to match the conditions that define their existence. There is no deviation from function. Each feature serves a purpose that aligns with survival at depth. Excess is removed, complexity is adjusted, and systems are refined until they operate within narrow limits. The squid becomes a reflection of its surroundings, carrying within its form the influence of pressure, scarcity, and stillness. As depth increases, these influences intensify. The range of possible forms becomes more restricted, and the resulting adaptations grow more pronounced. What remains is shaped by necessity, each trait selected through its ability to persist under increasingly specific conditions. Across distant regions, the same patterns emerge. Species separated by vast distances arrive at similar configurations, guided by the same environmental forces. This repetition reinforces the underlying structure of the process, showing that the outcome is not isolated but widely shared. The sense of strangeness fades when viewed through this lens. What once seemed unfamiliar becomes understandable, not as an exception, but as part of a consistent system. The differences between forms reflect differences in conditions, not departures from any underlying principle. Life continues through alignment. It does not impose itself on the environment, but adjusts to it, reshaping structure and behavior in response to what is present. This adjustment remains steady, carried across generations, refining each form in relation to its surroundings. In the deepest regions, this alignment becomes more complete. There is little room for variation beyond what is necessary, and the forms that remain reflect this precision. They exist within a narrow range, sustained by adaptations that match the environment closely. And within that range, what feels unfamiliar is simply the result of conditions unlike those above, expressed through forms that follow the same quiet logic seen throughout the descent. The pattern remains unbroken, extending from light into darkness, from abundance into scarcity, carrying with it the same principle that life continues not by resisting change, but by becoming exactly what its environment allows.